Keto and Krime, Keto and Krime. We uncover the grime on Keto and Krime. Keto and Krime, Keto and Krime. Now is the time for Keto and Krime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Krime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks, everyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Keto and Krime. Today we are finally back to our Catholic series with the Spanish Inquisition. As you recall, last time we covered the Borgias. And I said that would be leading into an in-depth analysis of both the Spanish Inquisition, which was chronologically next because it started, before technically the Reformation, and then we'll be into Martin Luther and the Reformation, and then into the Tudors. I will sprinkle some other topics in between here. I've got some great true crime. I've got some great movie reviews, and the final, a third part of my obscure horror movies discussion with Carrie and Mike. So all that's coming up, as well as I'm gearing up for October. I do plan to finish the Catholic series hopefully by October. If not, it will pick up right after, and I will finish it then. And then, of course, the Crusades. So we've got a lot to look forward to. And I think it's just, it's fun. And I am going to be sprinkling some stuff in between there as well. So I am about to head off on a little family trip over Labor Day. So videos next week, the week of Labor Day, just before Labor Day, just after, might be a little lean. But then I will pick up with my normal schedule. I appreciate everyone's patience on that. And with that being said, and a hearty thank you to everyone, let's dive into the Spanish. What is the Spanish Inquisition? Well, it should really be called the Inquisition, or the Catholic Inquisition, or the Religious Inquisition, or whatever you want to call it, because it wasn't just Spain, but it is primarily associated with the Spanish Peninsula because so much of it was concentrated there, and the most well-known leg of it actually had its starts there, which we will talk about, but it did consume most of Europe. It wasn't just Spain. All in all, it lasted about 300 years and is estimated conservatively to have caused the death of between 6,000 to 8,000 people, which, as tragic as that is, it really kind of gets played up. It's dwarfed by the 60 million that Mao killed in China, or the 6 million that Hitler killed, or just Jewish people. Let's not even take into consideration everyone else. And then how much did Stalin kill? Conservative estimates have him between 20 and 60 million dead. So it's dwarfed in view of things like that. Even the Crusades are dwarfed by what has been done in the name of secular government. But the Catholic Church has been a big baddie, and so it's just something that we have to talk about, and it is intricate in how they took control and tried to maintain control of the European continent. So first we have to talk about why the Pope thought this kind of thing was justified. And you'll be surprised at who actually suggested it. But basically, you have to look at what was happening in Europe. You had the fall of the Western Roman Empire. You had it spiraling into the basis of the European countries we know today. We had the Dark Ages. We had, we had people immigrating from the east and coming from the what was now known as the Ottoman Empire, which coming in, and you did have a very successful push by Islamic armies into the Iberian Peninsula around 711 AD, or Common Era. And that's where you had a huge buildup on the Iberian Peninsula, where the smaller countries that would later compose Spain, the Aragons, the Castiles, even Portugal, though Portugal was not part of Spain. All of these were concentrated on that peninsula, and there you had a huge Islamic, or Moor, as they're known. Think of Shakespeare's Othello, Moors, population as well. You also had a huge Jewish population there, and so you had not only Christians, which were by and large Catholics there, but you also had Moors, Muslims, and Jews. And you had this largely across Europe. You had a very similar concentration of not just Christians or Catholics. You had Jews, you had Muslims, and you also had a smattering of other religions. You had some, pagan religions thrown in there. You had just some people that didn't necessarily believe the way the Catholics believed, though they considered themselves Christian. You had some Greek Orthodox sprinkled in there. You had a little bit of everything, and so by and large, you had not just the Catholic Church looking on in fear that perhaps they were about to lose their control. They have to sell those indulgences, they have to sell those tickets to heaven, they have to keep that tithe coming in, that they were losing control of both all of Europe and the individual countries within Europe. And you had monarchs that felt the same way. And so you had a lot of anti-Semitism, Islamic phobia, everything else kind of boiling up. And so a lot of people started getting very scared and decided, okay, what's the best way to deal with the situation? Well, you eliminate the source of the problem, and that's anybody that doesn't believe the way you do, and therein is still a universal human problem. And so let's talk about the roots of the Spanish Inquisition within what is now Spain. You had Ferdinand and Isabella, remember? Castile and Aragon that united to unite the two biggest sub-countries of Spain into one united Spain. That was basically smiled upon, and we're good friends with our old buddy, Mr. Borgia. You had them being the first monarchs to reach out with a federal hand and say that perhaps we should do something with people that don't think like us. You had Moors in Aragon and Castile that were wealthy. You had wealthy Jews. You had this pervading fear that, you can't really govern a very diverse group of people without there being trouble. You had fear that the Ottoman Empire, you had the fear that they might be putting plants in your country and that they would eventually march right in and take over. The Moors were there. That wasn't an actual Islamic invasion as part of one of the many crusades. So you had all of this fear. You had the fear that you had a great, significant amount of wealth in the hands of Jews and Muslims, and just people that weren't necessarily true Catholic. So in 1478, they petitioned then Pope Sixtus IV to allow them to establish 2 or 3 priests as sort of a trifecta, a council, if you will. As if this was True Blood, this would be like the Vampire Authority, that would basically remove heretics, that would judge whether or not somebody was a heretic, that is, not believing in the true Catholic way. And of course, that is Jews, Muslims, and anyone that is not a straight line Roman Catholic, and that they would then recommend retribution back to the crown, and the crown, under the authority of this trifecta council, would carry out either forced conversion or forced removal. You can take that as you will. And after a couple of years of pressure, by 1483, the Pope granted it, and by that same year, 1483, the first trifecta was put together to start judging these things. Yeah, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Not something you ever want to hear. Of course, this trifecta only had the power at the time to put its power over actually confessed Christians. So people that said they were Christians but had been reported for some sort of heresy. What they would do in the name of for Jews and Muslims would be to recommend to Ferdinand and Isabella that these people were perhaps some sort of dissident, and they would be tried by the government. But it's all the same thing. It's all presided over by either a Catholic-run government or the Catholic Church themselves. And thus began 300 years of terror, as for any number of reasons, you could be put up as a heretic, and then you were tried by what they call forced confessions. They would torture you using some of the world's most heinous torture devices. The only outlier was that you could not spill blood. That was against Catholic law at the time. So they basically, you're talking about things like the rack, cat and nine tails, whips that had small pieces of metal embedded in it. You had, basically a draw without the quartering. You had all kinds of, even the Iron Maiden, supposed later invention of the evolution. But you had all these things that could not draw blood. That was the only caveat. And they would invoke these torturous things on people to get them to confess to their heresy. And once they confessed to the heresy, there was only three ways it could go. Either they were now, in their confession, they not only confess it, but say how wrong they were, and they're sorry. Well, okay. Then we acquit you, but here's a fine you have to pay. Particularly, this was done with very wealthy people, as you can imagine. And then you were either judged guilty and punished by the tribunal, or you were judged guilty and sent over to the monarchy, such in the case of wealthy Jews and Muslims, and then the king and queen would do with you as they were. Most of the time, you were killed or exiled from Spain, and all of your possessions and everything were forfeit to either the church or the crown, depending on what your religious affiliation was. And as you can imagine, many of these tribunals were quite corrupt. There's been stories over the entire 300 years of many of these priests who were supposed to have taken a vow of celibacy, wanting certain men's wives for themselves, and then they would, accuse or have accused their husband and get them removed that way. Or you had neighbors that were mad at other neighbors or mad at somebody for this or that, and they would falsely report them for heresy, because the way these accusations happened, it was all in private. Any citizen or mainly other Christian could come to the tribunal and report somebody as being a heretic, and they would do it in private, and then an investigation, i.e. forced confession, was enabled, and then the punishment. So around 8,000 people probably met death and torture as a result of the Spanish Inquisition. It finally fell out of favor in 1800 as you had the Enlightenment period coming in and a less reliance on religion and the beginning of the decline of the Catholic Church. So you had this finally fading out, and most estimates have the body count at around 8,000. So that's the very brief story of the Spanish Inquisition. There's, there's a lot more little individual stories in there, but that's the overarching, thing is that it was done to silence people that would dare speak against the church or the state that was heavily influenced by the church, particularly in Spain. But this happened in all British countries. There was a form of this when England, after the Reformation, after Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church and created the Church of England, after he died, and then his young son, which we will get to the Tudors, died. You had Bloody Mary Tudor, Mary I of House of Tudor, come to power, and she basically tried a very similar type of this with the help of both Spain and the Roman Catholic Pope to forcibly convert all the Protestants back to Catholicism. So this happened in stages. But what happened in Spain in the 14 and 1500s really laid the groundwork for what would follow in several European countries. England, you had some of it in France, some other little countries around Europe. So that's kind of what happened. So I hope you enjoyed this very brief foray into the Spanish Inquisition. I will be back very, very soon with Martin Luther and the Reformation, and then with the Tudors, which is probably going to be an extended video because there's a lot to cover there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon. Until next time, Keto and Krime.